Okay, welcome back for the 12th and final week of the Mind Mend series on eradicating addiction. I'm Dr. O'Connor. I am your host and the creator of this course and its contents. All right, so we have reached the end of this particular program for healing your mind and specifically for dealing with symptoms of addiction in your life. So this week we are going to talk about a basic set of instructions, okay, for how to continue this process of eliminating and incorporating any habits that you wish to discard or bring in. All right, so we are going to summarize that into 5 steps. And these 5 steps are also going to serve as the foundation or base for any developing spiritual practice. All right, so we're going to summarize that. And then in the second part, we are going to get into effective ways to share this skill set and what you have learned and attained by implementing it with the rest of the world. Okay, so basically we're going to summarize how to cultivate this for yourself, and then we are going to get into how to help others to cultivate this for themselves. All right, so before we get too far into this week's lecture, I want to give a little preface to the next lecture series that will be coming out next year, which is going to be on titration off of antidepressant medications. So if you are someone that has been on antidepressant medications long-term, what I mean by long-term is longer than 2 years, it is extremely important to go through this lecture series first. Even if you don't identify as having any substance use disorder issues, this is a skill set that is going to be directly applicable to that particular process. Okay, so the process of getting off of these medications is very difficult. It's very difficult to sit through a lot of the emotions that come up. It's difficult to negate and discard the various thought patterns that come up during this. So we are going to take the fundamentals of this program and directly utilize those in the series on titrating off of antidepressant medication. So the reason I bring this up is because it is very, very common for people who experience the symptom of addiction to get labeled as being mentally ill, get different diagnoses in the realm of mental health disorders, and then subsequently become medicated or in some essence, chemically dependent on a wide variety of different antidepressant medications, okay? So if we are going to effectively, safely, and successfully wean off of these substances, which is a very difficult thing to do, but not impossible, then we have to have a foundation, we have to have a base. These things need to be in place before that is attempted because of how difficult it can be, okay? So there are a couple reasons for this. Number one, we want to make sure that prior to starting the process of weaning off any antidepressant medications, that we have an incredibly sturdy foundation, a very sturdy base, or as sturdy as it can be in terms of our neurochemistry and our lives and our mental functioning. So we need to make sure we are not utilizing even lightly things like alcohol, things like nicotine. Ideally, even caffeine is going to go, okay? Because we want to create as level of a playing field as we can prior to removing any substance that our brains have been reliant on for a prolonged period of time in order to effectively accumulate things like serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine. Okay, we are going to have to wait through this sort of uncomfortable period of reteaching our cells, our neural cells, how to do this independently of these medications. And that process, that period of time between when the medication is weaned and when the brain learns how to do that, is very uncomfortable. So we want to make sure that we have eradicated any addictions or any habits even of using any substances that alter the brain chemistry in any way. So that's one reason we do this part first, this program first. The second reason is because if you don't if you don't take the time to build this skill set first, and you do have some underlying pathology or unhealthy relationships with any substances or behaviors, when you start or engage in the process of titrating off of antidepressants, you're going to be very uncomfortable, and there's going to be a very, very strong tendency to go towards anything that will give you relief from that discomfort. It is very intense. That is a very normal response because of the intensity of which these symptoms can arise when we start to do that. Okay, so we want to make sure that we are very solid in a practice that's going to promote mental wellness, and that we have a skill set in place so that we don't slip into addiction once we start the process of peeling away any layers of that develop as a result of long-term use of antidepressant medications. Okay, so be on the lookout for that. It will be coming out sometime next year, and make sure that you are solid in this foundation prior to starting the process of weaning yourself off of any mental health medications. All right. So for this week, the symptom management component. So this is the basic summary of the 5 steps that we are going to use in order to cultivate proficiency in this internal process of being able to make and break habits on a whim. And in addition, we are building our spiritual base here. So there are 5 parts of this. The first part we are going to call wait. All right, so this is the interval component that we've been utilizing up to this point. So in this, we are either going periods of time without using something. So that's if we're trying to weed something out, okay, whether it be a certain behavior or a substance, or you're going certain intervals to incorporate something. So you've committed to a certain number of days in a row to practicing a new skill, or incorporating a new habit or something like that, okay? So this first part, this wait component, really has to do with either sitting through the discomfort of not doing something you feel this compulsion to do. So sitting through things like craving, sitting through things like uncomfortable emotions so that you do not engage in destructive habits or patterns in order to alleviate yourself from that. Or it is incorporating discipline to encourage and sort of force yourself, if you will, to do something that maybe you don't feel like doing every day, okay? So maybe some days you're in the process of incorporating a new skill or habit and you're really excited about it and you're gung-ho, and some days you're like, I don't really want to do that. But you do it anyway, okay? Because you've committed to it for this interval. So this first part, the wait, is basically what we're doing is we're waiting for the brain to adjust to whatever we're trying to weed out or in, okay? So whether we're weakening a neural pathway by not using it, okay, so by not engaging in the behavior or use of the substance, or we're building something new or strengthening a different neural pathway, either way, that requires waiting. So we're waiting for the physiologic components of our brain to catch up to what we are doing with our behaviors. And so when we do that, there's that period of resistance that we've talked about, where you sort of have to like force yourself to do something you don't want to do, or refrain from doing something you feel like you want to do, okay? In either instance, when you make it out the other side of this physical process that takes place, it no longer requires effort to not use or do the thing, or to incorporate or do the new habit, whichever one you're working on, okay? So this first step is to use discipline to either not do things or to do things, whatever you're working on, until that physical neural process is complete and the habit or cessation of the habit has completely solidified. All right, so that's the first part. The second part is to meditate. Okay, so right now we have been using the 15 minutes in the morning to sit in silence with no external stimulation and cultivate contented sobriety. Okay, so that has been the purpose of that time and that space up to this point. Once you have reached a place of contented sobriety and you have done the bulk of the clean out work, if you will, in terms of eradicating symptoms that are self-destructive and harmful, then I want you to move from a space of cultivating that to cultivating this interiorization, or this awareness of what's going on for you physically, emotionally, and then what's going on mentally, what's going on in terms of the content of your thoughts. All right. So you'll move from cultivating contented sobriety, once you live in that all of the time, to using this time to cultivate somatic awareness and to sit in stillness and pay attention to what's going on in your physical vessel. Okay. At least 15 minutes to start. Ideally, you're spacing this out over time as you can. All right. 3, contemplate. All right, so we're going to use the time in the evening that we have set aside in order to look at our conduct throughout the day and examine if there are any areas that we would like to do things differently, or perhaps there are instances or interactions with other people that if you had the opportunity to say, do it again, you would do things differently. We're reflecting on how it would look if you were able to go back and do it differently. You can also reflect on your internal reaction to external things, to people, to situations, to some things that happen at work or whatever it happens to be. And if you're noticing a negative reaction to certain things that is sort of habitual, you can start to look at how you can reposition or adjust yourself to these things so that you don't have that internal response of negativity, whether it's anger or sadness or whatever the flavor of the dense reaction is. Okay, so and ideally you're writing about these things. Ideally in your contemplation, you are objectively looking at any ways that you would have conducted yourself differently. You're listing them and then you're writing out what exactly you would do differently. Okay, so this is going to be really good for you in terms of identifying areas of stuckness, areas of sort of repeat offenses, if you will, in terms of your reactions to others or your internal responses to certain external stimuli. All right, so this is going to cultivate a huge amount of self-awareness, which is going to either help you identify where you're getting stuck and or help you get unstuck. All right, so the 4th thing is integrate. All right, so we in this stage are going to be targeting any new habits that we need to incorporate, or you can start the practice of a new skill here. Whatever it is, we are going to get clear on what exactly we would like to bring into our lives, and we are going to start the process of integrating those things into our lives. Okay, so we can start that by identifying what exactly we want to integrate. Again, don't do too many things at once because it can be a lot to hold if you try to stack too many things together at one time. So if there's a lot of things you want to integrate, make a list of them and then start with 1 or 2 and formulate a solid plan as to how you're going to do that. All right. So what time of day is best to start the cultivation of a new skill? Maybe you're trying to learn a new language or something. So, when is best and how is best in order to practice that every single day. Okay. And then you can plug whatever you've decided in this step back into your weight component, back into the first stage, and you can start incorporating it into your regular everyday life. And before you know it, you will develop a proficiency in something that you have had a desire to develop proficiency in. Okay. So here we are identifying and coming up with a plan for how we are going to integrate positive components or desirable skills into our lives. Okay, it is very important to have as many things that you are integrating is that you are trying to dispel. So basically, when you're dispelling a bunch of things like old addictions, behavioral patterns, what have you, kind of leaves this big empty space. So this is a really important piece of filling that space with something that you want to be there so that you don't sort of deviate or go into a different version of the same thing with some of the self-destructive patterns, because that can be kind of a common pitfall too. All right. And then the last thing is educate. All right, so you are going to spend 10 to 30 minutes a day either reading or listening to some kind of literature that supports your healing, supports your growth, supports your recovery, okay? Or you can also spend this time researching different spiritual paths once you have chosen a spiritual path, using this time to submerge yourself in literature or educational material that helps you better understand and implement this spiritual path in your everyday existence. Okay, so we have these 5 components here. We have 1, wait. That's basically the interval work that we have been heavily focused on throughout the series. 2, meditate or sit. All right, no external stimulation. You're just sitting in silence, you're cultivating stillness, learning how to connect with that innate intelligence that we talked about last week. 3, contemplate, going into self-reflection surrounding your own behavior, surrounding your reactions to things, to people, to circumstances. 4, integrate. Okay, so identifying what is important to have in our lives and then how to best incorporate those things and how to set ourselves up for success as we go through that process. And 5, educate. All right, so you're going to be educating yourself on how you can continue to effectively heal yourself, and also how you can develop a more robust spiritual practice that is going to hold and support this work that you are currently doing. Very important. Okay, so those are the 5 components of cultivating this skill set for yourself, okay, of developing proficiency at making and breaking habits at will, and then also dispelling any addictive tendencies. All right. So if you do the work, the inner work here of the wound healing component, the addictions, if you will, or the symptoms that you have that are negative are going to dispel without a whole lot of effort. Okay. And at some point you're going to really feel this. Once you get to a certain point of healing, you're going to really understand how incompatible certain behaviors are with the way that your internal world has adjusted itself. So if you do the inner work, you're not going to have to try to be sober. You're not going to have to try not to engage in behaviors that are damaging to yourself and others, because it is going to be a side effect of healing. Okay, just the same way addiction is a symptom of this unhealed sickness, of this wounding. Okay, so sobriety and contentedness and happiness and overall well-being is a symptom of having healed this. All right, and so the further and further you get into this, the more you will understand that through your own experience, and the easier it's going to get to continue to implement it in your daily life. All right. Now, there are a lot of instances where you might say, okay, well, what if I'm addicted to something like food? Or what if I, cannot completely detach myself from media because it's a huge component of what I do for work to make money? Or what if I have a problem with something like sex that, is a part of being able to connect, with my partner, or I'm trying to date or whatever. Okay. So you say, what if I have a problem with one of these things that is sort of unavoidable that you're going to have to engage in, right? Like permanent sobriety from like food is not an option, right? So if that's the case though, you can still use the interval to reset your relationship with these things, and in order to reestablish pleasure in these things. Okay. So if, like anything else, there's a healthy and unhealthy relationship that can develop between you and just about anything. Okay, so whether it's food or exercise or sex or an attachment to a specific person or group of people, that any of those things can become pathologic. So if you're dealing with an addiction that is to something that you are not supposed to completely eradicate, you can still sort of fast from these things and use the interval component, use the wait component to create space between you and that thing so that you can clear out the relationship that you currently have with it. Clear out that energy. Use that time to do some work on the inner wounding that's causing the dysfunctional relationship in the first place, and then sort of go back to the thing and attach to it differently. You can do multiple rounds of this, okay? So this can look like actually fasting from food, okay? This can look like media detox, making an intentional effort to put your phone down for prolonged periods of time. Okay. This can look like abstaining from sex or practicing moderation in sex. Okay. This can look however you need it to look. My point is, you can still use the interval component to correct your relationship with things that may have become problematic through this symptom of this same wounding pattern. Okay. So you're going to have to get honest with yourself about what you have unhealthy relationships with in your life. Most of us do have unhealthy relationships with certain behaviors. And some of the behaviors can be, labeled as healthy or rewarded by society. Exercise is a common example of this, and certainly one that I have had an unhealthy relationship with in the past. So you're going to have to really get good at calling yourself on where you feel the sort of pathological underpinnings of certain relationships with certain behaviors and with certain substances. Okay. So that being said, you don't have to have the goal of complete abstinence in order to implement this with whatever you are trying to correct. Okay. And again, as that wounding is healed, you're not going to have to worry as much or at all eventually about these sort of pathological relationships with these things forming, because it's not going to be compatible with where you're at in terms of your own internal peace and contentedness. So but be on the lookout for that until you do reach that point of internal healing, because as long as that sickness is still somewhat alive in there, it's going to try to keep finding ways to manifest. And it can be very tricky because it often will utilize sometimes, like I said, healthy things or essential things to human existence in order to manifest itself. Okay. So be on the lookout for that as you embark on your journey of healing this wounding that causes that in the first place. All right. So now we are going to get into how to effectively share this skill that you have developed with others. Okay. So this is going to have 3 parts. The first part is going to talk about exemplifying this through self-mastery. Okay, so basically leading by example. We're going to talk about number 2, prevention of this in the generations to come. And then number 3, how to share this with others who are actually and actively seeking its contents. Okay, so when you share this information with others, you are honing in on your own proficiency. Okay. And this is true when you're teaching anything, right? Like if you're able to teach someone something, a skill that you know how to effectively implement, it sort of solidifies your own understanding of it. And that's true with this too. So in this way, we are solidifying a process that we have decided to implement for ourselves while simultaneously helping others to do the same thing. So you have this sort of self-healing and this collective healing that happens at the same time. And it's extremely rewarding and it's extremely efficient. Okay. So in this first part where we're just leading by example, you basically aren't doing anything except for protecting and firmly embodying what you have learned how to do here. Okay, so you are holding yourself to standards that are higher all of the time. So you sort of start from this place and you start to kind of climb your way up. And what you start to do is you start to expect more of yourself. And as you do that, you're going to start to carry yourself differently. You're going to start to interact with the world differently. You're going to start to experience the world differently. Okay, so, and then when you do that, your actual vibration rises. And then when you are around other people, you are going to, without saying anything, without having to do anything, without having to draw attention to this, you are going to encourage their vibration to come up too. So one thing that is important as you go out into the world and hold firm in your different space, right? As you cultivate these higher and higher frequencies, as you sort of get these sort of more dense, problematic things out and you bring in higher vibrational behaviors, activities, emotions, what have you, you are going to create more and more space, more and more vibrational space between yourself and what you are used to in the outside world. Okay, so people, places, different energetic responses that you have for and from different people. So as that space begins to widen, you will notice a tendency or like a rub, okay, between yourself and this space that you're now inhabiting and the rest of the world, if you will, or the people that you frequently come into contact with. This can cause discomfort. This is common. It is common for people who are not utilizing any sort of process for their own development, for their own healing, for their own ascension. It is common for those people to be very bothered by when they see people that are clearly doing this, okay? And so if these people happen to be people that are close to you, so maybe they're immediate family members, or maybe they're people that have been close friends for a long period of time, okay? If you start to experience this rub, your job, if you will, in this first part is to hold your own space, hold your own frequency, hold your own developing psyche here, and do not meet others where they are down here in order to accommodate that. Do not do it, because it will impede your growth and it will not help theirs. So in this first part, all we're doing is insisting on staying here, even when other people want us to come down here. Okay, so let's just say, for instance, maybe you're giving up drinking and you're like, well, I can still, go out to eat or go out to the bar or whatever with this person. You can, but be prepared for them to want you to come down here and drink with them. Okay, because that's what they are doing themselves. That's what they've known you to do. And they're not going to like you hanging out up here. They want you to come down when they are. So your job here is to say, no, I'm going to continue to hold this other space that I'm cultivating for myself. Okay. And you can choose to participate in whatever you want to participate in, but sometimes it is wise to sort of remove yourself from situations and people that sort of insist on this persistent tug down to more dense vibrational patterns, okay? Especially when you're early on in this. So here you are holding your space regardless of how other people feel about it and regardless of what's going on around you, basically. And what you're doing when you do this is you put yourself, say, in an environment and you have done this work and you're no longer exhibiting these symptoms of dependence, these symptoms of addictions, these, symptoms of needing something to cover up this dis-ease inside of you. Okay. You plug yourself in the middle of a bunch of people that are still doing that. Okay. They are still running from themselves. They are still full of dis-ease and they don't know what to do about it. They aren't implementing positive changes. Basically, what you're doing is your awareness is subconsciously, sort of under the surface, connecting with theirs and saying, there's another way to do this. Okay. It's challenging them to rise up. And that is going to create the rub that we're talking about. Okay. Because your awareness is basically saying, like, look, I'm not stuck and I used to do what you're doing. So there's a way to be unstuck. And if someone is unwilling or unable to look at those ways to unstuck themselves, they're not going to like that. So you don't have to say or do anything in order for that to rub people the wrong way. Okay, so just beware that that's a thing. It is not your obligation to fix someone else. It is not your obligation to start this process in someone else. If people are looking for a solution to these things that cause disease, you will feel that and you will know it, and then you can, take that opening. But there are a lot of people that are not. So just know that you probably are going to interface with things like criticism and cruelty as you sort of start your rise up and up and up, and that these are normal things. Try to see it for what it is. All it is a symptom of unhealed wounding in other people. You can train yourself to respond to that with compassion, okay, instead of reacting to it. So this is really important too. So do not meet people where they are. Do not augment your behavior to accommodate for this lower vibrational stuff. Also, do not bring lower vibrational material into your vessel by cultivating things like anger at them for not being able to support you, or not being willing to support you, or not being able to understand or appreciate the kind of work that you've done on yourself. Okay, so don't let that in either. You can combat that by meeting them with understanding and compassion, because if you've worked your way to this point, you do understand what it feels like to be where those people are. You understand what it's like to be stuck, to not have a solution, to not want a solution, to just sort of have your blinders on and be doing things the way that you're doing them, okay? And you know how miserable that is. And so anyone's inability to sort of compliment or validate or appreciate the work that you're doing on yourself is due to unhealed wounding and the pain that is a result of which in them. Okay, it has nothing to do with you. So you hold your space in these higher vibrational arenas. Okay, don't go down here, stay up here no matter what. You don't have to get in fights with people. You can say nothing. You can remove yourself from the situation, but you do not come down here. And you also do not allow yourself to go into anger or resentment at people that are unable to validate or support you. Okay. So this first part is really just about holding and embodying the higher frequency that you will inevitably attain as a result of working through this stuff. Okay. So just be. That's all it is. Just heal and just be. And just that by itself will have an incredible impact on people around you. You're going to start bringing in people that do want to heal. They're going to get really curious. They're going to ask you about things. And that's when you can sort of go into this more thorough explanation of your own process and how you got there. So those openings will start to present themselves, and the people that can't be supportive or that there's this rub with that we were just talking about, they will start to weed themselves out. Okay. So this first part is very simple. Just be how you are and don't make accommodations for that based on unhealthy needs of other people. All right. So the second part of this is educating. All right. Educating specifically the youth, the upcoming generations, your own children, and any other young people that you may or may not work with. Okay. So maybe you are someone that, say, like works as a teacher or works with young adults regularly or something like that. This is especially applicable for you because prevention is curative. So if you can teach any component of these things to the child or adolescent who is struggling, you are going to be able to help prevent things like mental illness and the physical illness that results from which. You're going to prevent things like attachment disorder. You are going to prevent things like failure to thrive. Okay. And you're going to help these young people start from a very young age, learn how to do things like sit in stillness, cultivate self-love, cultivate new habits, or remove old habits as they see fit. Okay. You're going to help them develop practices and understandings of things that help them to become confident, well-rounded adults. And this is extremely important because it is a lot easier to prevent these things than it is to fix them. So whether it be in your own kids or any kids or adolescents that you have the opportunity to work with at an individual or group level, however you can sort of spread these little seeds, if you will, try to be doing that at any opportunity that is possible. So you can use opportunities like behavioral outbursts, or maybe early stages of substance use disorder in adolescence. Any of these things as example can serve as opportunities to start teaching this process to them. Okay, it doesn't have to be in a chronological order. It doesn't have to be in the way that we have just outlined exactly, but you can sort of directly tailor it to whatever that kid or adolescent is having a hard time with, and then teach them a component of this that would be helpful in directly confronting or dealing with whatever symptom they are struggling with. Okay, so if they're struggling with emotional outbursts, you can teach things like calming, sitting, how to physically calm the nervous system, how to, depending on the age of the child or adolescent, you can start getting into how to prevent these sort of activations from happening in the first place, how to cultivate more self-awareness by taking an outside perspective. So any of these things that you have learned throughout the course of the past few months can be tailored directly to fit the needs of any child or adolescent who is displaying things that are pretty easily tagged as being potentially problematic. Okay. If you have children and you're, say, meditating in the morning, bring them in with you. Make them sit. I mean, I know this isn't possible for every age range, but, if they're of an age where they are capable of sitting in stillness and silence, teach this young, because like a foreign language, if we can instill these things at a younger age, then you don't have to go through the hassle of correcting it later. The things that happen as a result of not learning these things, we won't have to fix them. Okay, so like if you teach a kid how to speak 2 or 3 languages between the age of 2 and 5, that is infinitely easier than trying to figure that out at 35. Okay, and it's not different with this. You're teaching them basically the language of being able to plug in. Okay, so that's something that they'll have for the duration of their lives, and something that they can return to if they ever find themselves in a situation where they feel lost or they go through something that they don't know how to navigate. So this is incredibly important to share with the upcoming generations in whatever way that you can. All right. So this can be something small, or you can, take the components of this that you think are appropriate and help kids start to utilize them as they grow and develop. Okay. So prevention is curative. Try to spread the essence of what you have learned in this with any and all youth that you come into contact with. All right. And then the third thing is teaching others this skill set. Okay. So you can put your own spin on this. You can certainly take the sort of highlights, if you will, of your own experience in this process, and then use that summary to help guide other people through this. So that's a way. Another way, especially if you're just kind of briefly interfacing with someone, you don't know them very well, but maybe they, for whatever reason, are there's an open door in terms of making some recommendations to them, and you can see and understand what they're having a hard time with. Okay, you can make any book recommendations. You can direct them to this podcast. You can direct them to any resources that you have found as being helpful for your own growth and recovery. Okay. Anything that you do here, whether it's sort of directly explaining to someone what was helpful for you and guiding them through it, or just directing them to certain resources, can have profound impacts on them that are very difficult to understand. Okay, so an example of this, right? Like, so in my late teens, early 20s, when I was dealing with alcohol use disorder for the first time, there were a handful of people that turned me on to resources, or that said something that resonated as being incredibly profound for me in terms of kind of sparking these internal realizations about things. And so if you can do that for someone else that is clearly seeking a path of self-improvement, a path of healing, a path of evolution, that can completely change the course of someone's life. in a way that you don't understand and in a way that is incredibly positive. So you can do that in really almost an infinite number of ways. And the more proficiency you have in this, the more easily you're going to be able to sort of pull out kind of what people need and then kind of direct them, if you will. So this can take on kind of a large or small manifestation depending on your relationship with the person and how frequently you interface with them and what have you. But you can have very very drastic effects from your willingness to even just provide little gentle nudges or small recommendations, or maybe you recommend a book that completely changes someone's perspective on their own internal process and what's happening for them. Okay, so when you come into contact with people that you can see are open and willing and trying to engage in some version of this process for themselves, try to take the opening if it is provided in order to help contribute something that will help to accelerate this process in them. Okay, so maybe it hasn't quite started yet, or maybe it's in the early phases of starting, but in any way that you can contribute to the start of this process, that once it's started, there's really no turning back. So if you can offer anything to help support or ignite that, that's really what we're looking for here. So you can look at this as, like when an engine is having a hard time starting, it can kind of like sort of turn over for a little while. Maybe it kind of gives this poor effort and it sounds tired or something, but then once it gets going, it's going. And it's gaining energy, it's gaining heat, it's gaining traction. It's similar to this process in us, this process of awakening. Okay, so once the fire is lit, once there's something solid there, it builds on itself and people figure it out, and they figure it out in these magical ways. But sometimes in order to ignite this fire or start this awakening or get the engine to start, it requires kind of an external, some kind of jab or some kind of piece of information or some kind of puzzle piece that we don't quite have yet. Okay, so here you are trying to help facilitate that or be that for other people in whatever way feels necessary. I am not advocating that you go out and start offering unsolicited advice to people that do not want it. Okay, there are a lot of people out there that are not at a point where they want to start this process in themselves. And sometimes there are reasons for that. So whether or not someone is or isn't ready to start doing this work on themselves, it's not for you to convert someone who isn't ready to someone who is. Okay, because the people that are ready or near ready are going to come towards you because you are now someone who has started this. And so you're going to start to cultivate that energy in yourself, and we attract what we are, right? So you are going to start to pull in more and more people who are ready or are very, very close to becoming ready. And so basically you are just being available as someone who has experience going through this yourself. Okay, you are going to be available as a resource to those people in whatever form that takes. Okay, so I would strongly encourage you never to expect someone to change, never to expect someone to commit to this work when they aren't. Okay, it may or may not happen. And if it does happen, it's going to be because there is something internally that stirs inside that person that sort of forces them to start doing this work. So try not to expect anything out of other people as you start this journey for yourself, and try not to offer any unsolicited advice or wisdom to people that are not ready or not willing to look at these things inside themselves, okay? Because you are not going to get met with an openness and a willingness to step into it. You're going to get met with resistance, anger, and things that are not helpful for you and things that are not helpful for them, okay? So just be aware of that and understand where people's limitations are, okay? You can support people by seeing them where they are, and supporting anything that they are doing that would push them in a direction of becoming ready, okay? And then just sort of turning your head from the rest of it, if you will, all right? So we try to do our best to not slip into things like judgment, to not slip into things like ultimatums, okay? That's what boundaries are for. So we're trying to elevate other people, all right? And there are a lot of people that just will not let you do that because they're sort of insistent on staying where they are in terms of their own patterns and their own behaviors and their own wounding, and that's okay. So your job is to basically be this elevating force, and it's constant and it's unchanging. And so there's certain things and certain parts of people that you are lifting up and supporting, and certain things that you are just letting be where they are without getting involved in them, okay? So I think as you get further and further into this, it's going to become more and more clear when people are and aren't really ready to start the process of cleaning out this wounding, of cleaning out this stuff, because it's not an easy thing to continue to implement each and every day. And it does, it requires consistency and it requires commitment. And so there are going to be different stages and phases of that in each individual person, okay? So stay committed to your own process and be a supportive force. Do not try to force your progress or your understandings or your realizations on anyone who's not asking, because that will not go well. People need space to feel out the different options. So basically, if someone, say, is at this point where they're really entrenched in some of their more negative habits, or deeply entrenched in a specific addiction or something like that, and maybe they are, kind of coming close to the point where they have to do something about it, and you can see that, we all have to go through this process of seeing what's available to us, okay? So I know for myself, I got to this point where I could see all of the options, right? It was like, okay, I can see what staying addicted to these different substances, how that's going to play out in my life. And that's an option. I can choose that, okay? That's a way that it can go. I can see how partial removal of certain things is going to look in my life. I can see how that's going to go. I can see how completely giving up and giving into all this negativity that's inside of me is going to go. I can see that. I can see the path of really committing to healing this wounding. I can see how that's going to go, and I can feel how difficult that's going to be. So you start to, when you're getting to the point where you're close to ready, but maybe not quite there, you start this process of analyzing these different things that are available to you. And there has to be space for that, because if you try to force someone into the path that you think is best, and maybe the path that is best, right? I mean, in the sense that obviously it's going to be healthier for someone to not use IV drugs than it is for someone to not do that. But if you try to force that option on someone, you're going to be met probably with resistance, because you're not allowing space for that person to really see and understand all of the options that are available to them, okay? So we have to choose healing. We have to choose sobriety. We have to choose the things that are going to raise us up, okay? So that means we have to look at the menu of choices that we have with the circumstances that we are dealt, And a lot of times we have to feel into the ones we don't want before we come to the conclusion that we have to choose, some of these paths that involve a little more work and that don't involve things like instant gratification. Okay, we have to come to those conclusions on our own and through trial and error. Okay, so it's really important to give people space to do this. And this can take lifetimes, unfortunately. And that's why I say don't hold any expectations for people, because there's no time frame on this. There's no like, oh, well, if they keep doing this miserable thing, like eventually they'll figure it out. Well, yes, for sure, that is true, but you don't know when, and you don't know how that looks for them, and you don't know how long that's going to take, and you don't, there's so many things that you can't possibly know. So as you take on this understanding for yourself, and as you start to deliver it into the world, just know that there are going to be people who are receptive to it and people that are not receptive to it. And there are things, places, people in this world that are not meant to be healed and that can't be healed. So it is really important for you to develop the discernment that you need to develop in order to decide what is worthwhile and what can be receiving of this skill set that you have developed for yourself. Okay. So again, there's a tremendous amount of healing for you and for the rest of the world that comes as a result of you doing this work. And there's really no greater gift that you can offer the world. Okay, so your healing journey is sort of like your fingerprint. No other person is going to have an experience with this that's exactly like yours. And so once you get to sort of the other side of this, you get all of the wisdom that comes with that. And that is such a gift to everybody that you touch. And so you get to fully experience how good this feels to clean this out for you, and then how good it feels to start the process of sharing this with other people. Because similarly to disease, okay, things like physical health, viruses, what have you, and then mental health, attitudes about things, all of these things are very contagious. So whatever you're harboring inside of yourself, you're going to spread that to the rest of the world. So if you start harboring the results of doing this work in yourself, you are going to spread that to the rest of the world in your own unique flavor of way. And there's no greater gift that you can provide the world with. Okay, so we need more of this, and it is incredibly important to take the time and the space and the responsibility that we all have of doing this work in ourselves. Okay, so I send you all of the blessings and all of the mental wellness and health and well-being as you embark on this laborious but very fruitful journey for yourself. I wish you all the best. Good luck, and we'll see you on the next series on medication titration. Thank you.